Hello, and thank you for joining me today. We will be reviewing an online PowerPoint presentation for the Monterey and San Benito County point-in-time count. So today we'll be covering the purpose of the PIT count, and when I say PIT count, PIT stands for point-in-time count. So we're going to be reviewing the purpose of this PIT count, why the PIT count matters, what the PIT count will tell us. We'll be reviewing what you will be doing on the day of the count, and then we'll finish up going over next steps and reminders. I'm going to start by reviewing the purpose of the point-in-time count. The Department of Housing and Urban Development requires this point-in-time count to be completed of every homeless person in the United States during the last 10 days of January. These unsheltered counts are currently required every other year, and the counts are happening all over the country. They must be organized. The PIT count is important for a number of reasons. It increases the community understanding of homelessness. It enables counties to retain and improve funding for homeless services by meeting federal data reporting requirements. This methodology that we will be reviewing today and that you will be participating in on the day of the count is a method that has been approved by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. In addition, the count generates valid and accurate data regarding individuals and families experiencing homelessness in the community. And then lastly, it links homeless data collection efforts to national and local strategic program and policy planning. So what we're doing here in the county is also connected to data that's being collected nationally. The PIT count process is composed of a few different components. You will be involved in the general street count, and that's the middle box you see. But just so you have a full understanding of what the entire process entails, I wanted to review all the components. On the evening of January 24th, that's the night before we'll be going out into the field, we conduct a shelter count, and that's where we communicate with all of the shelters in Monterey and San Benito counties, and we have them report to us how many homeless individuals stayed with them that night. Then, on the morning of January 25th, we conduct our general street count, and that's what you will be participating in. That is early in the morning out on the streets. And then later in the day, we have a youth count, and that is focused on a separate outreach to find our youth population in Monterey and San Benito counties. The final and third component is a survey process, and that is conducted in the 2 to 3 weeks following the count, and that's a 2-page survey that we send out into the field to get a representative sample of some of the experiences of homeless individuals that are living on the streets and in shelters in Monterey and San Benito County. So here's this next slide that I was referring to. So some of the shelter accommodations that are included in the homeless definition would be makeshift shelters, people living on the streets, people living in vehicles, people living in parks or abandoned buildings, people staying on buses, in bus or train stations, people living in airports, or people staying at camping grounds without paying for a permit. Some areas that are not included, and this is where I want to remind you of this somewhat limited definition so that you understand what you're looking for on the day of the counts. We will not be including people who are couch surfers, people who are living in double up situations. Double up would be where you have maybe a family of 8 or 9 people staying in a 1-bedroom house. So a house that's maybe meant for 2, 3 max, you have, up to double the amount of people that is meant to stay in that house. We're not including people in rehab or mental health facilities. We're not including most people staying in jails or prisons. And then we're also not including anybody awaiting eviction or foreclosure. So that's a little bit of a review of what to expect of what you're looking for on the day of the count. Here you see a couple pictures of some areas that would be included. This left picture would be an example of an encampment. So an encampment is an area that has at least 2 or more tents or makeshift shelters. And then on the right is an example of a bus station where you might find somebody sleeping and they would be defined as homeless. As I mentioned in the previous slide, individuals living in their cars are included in this definition. So this slide is meant to review how to tell if a car or a vehicle appears to be inhabited by a homeless individual. So you're going to look for signs of habitation in the car. So that would be fogged windows, maybe electrical connections coming out of the car, screen or window coverings. Oftentimes there'll be household items inside and outside of the vehicle, making it seem like more of a permanent living place. You might hear sounds of music or talking from the inside of the vehicle. And then sometimes there are some known safe parking locations or known vehicles by your homeless guide. So remember, we don't want you, and I'll review this a little bit more in the safety slides, but we don't want you to be going up to these cars or knocking on their windows to see or ask these individuals if they are homeless. Rather, we want this to be a visual count. So hopefully you can remember this slide and work with your homeless guide to determine whether a vehicle appears to be inhabited by homeless individuals or not. So some of the logistics of what to expect for this pit count. Like I started to mention in the previous slide, the street count is a visual count of people residing on the street, in parks, in vehicles, in abandoned buildings, and in makeshift shelters. I want to emphasize the visual count piece. While you're out there in the field, we ask that you don't interrupt these individuals. They might be sleeping, they might be inside of a tent. We ask that you don't go up and talk to them. If they approach you and are interested in what you're doing, you're more than welcome to have a conversation. But first and foremost, we want to make sure that we're respecting these individuals' living accommodations and respecting and being respectful of their space. The street counts are planned while people are still in public shelters. That's why we head out there as early as possible. Like I mentioned before, this timing is important to avoid duplication. This earlier time is generally when individuals are still going to be in the shelters. So we can get those individuals from our shelter count, and then we have you guys out in teams to collect people who are living in unsheltered situations. If you have a map area that includes a shelter, we ask that you head to that area around the shelter first. A couple more logistics I want to review. Just a reminder that volunteers will not be paid for their time, nor will they be reimbursed for their mileage while out in the census tract areas. Homeless guides are paid $15 an hour, and that's for their expertise during the count, as well as for their time spent in training. Just a reminder that all homeless guides must have a 2017 pit count referral card and a training attendance card in order to receive payment on the day of the count. Another reminder that all payments will be made when teams return to the deployment center on the day of the count. So payment for homeless guides attending trainings, as well as their time spent out in the field, will be received after they return with materials at the end of the count. All right, just to review a little bit further some of the logistics for the day of the count. We ask that you arrive to your deployment location by 5:30 a.m. This is when both guides and volunteers are going to assemble together. We will have you complete some paperwork. There's a sign-in sheet and a hold harmless agreement. Then we'll spend some time reviewing safety protocols, go over the data collection forms, and review some of the data quality standards that we expect while you're out in the field. Next, there'll be the process of creating teams. That's where we match up volunteers and guides. Reminder that there'll be no volunteers under the age of 18. Then we distribute your street count packets. So that will include your maps and data collection forms. I'll be going over those in a little bit. We'll also review or hand out clipboards and pencils. We'll give you a printout of some of the training guidelines. We'll give you contact phone numbers so that you can get in touch with us back at the deployment location while you're out in the field. And then we also have some stickers for you to wear while you're out in the field so that people know that you're participating in this count. Then you'll leave as soon as all that's done and your team is created. You have your materials. There's a checkout form. We'll get your contact information and we'll send you off on your way. Then we ask that everybody returns to the deployment centers by 10 a.m. or you might be done sooner if you finish your map area earlier in the morning. So if you think you're going to be any longer than that time frame, we ask that you give us a call. Otherwise, we will expect to see you by 10 a.m. Here's a couple pictures of examples of what it will look like at the deployment center. Usually there's some coffee or snacks in the morning provided, and then some tables set up with all of the materials, and we'll have all of our volunteers and guides congregate in the middle, and then from there, once we review the safety protocols, we'll create the teams and everybody will be on their way. I wanted to review quickly the team creation logistics. So like I said, the volunteers and guides arrived at the deployment center. Then there's the review, like I mentioned, of the safety tips and count protocol. And then these teams are created of 2 to 3 people. Generally, this is 1 to 2 volunteers and 1 guide. The reason why I'm taking time to review this is because we want to make sure that everybody knows what to expect on the morning of the count. It's important that we have enough volunteers to match with our guides and that also we have enough vehicles. So even if you arrive with a friend or a colleague, it's possible that you will get split up and be on separate teams. It all just kind of depends on who shows up on the day of the count and what our numbers look like. Once your team is created, you're assigned a map location. So I want to remind you that the entire county has to be covered. So that means not everybody's going to get a map that will be in an area that is likely to have a lot of homeless individuals, but it's our responsibility to send out teams to every corner of the county. The deployment center captain will manage this assignment process. Just so you know, some maps will be pre-assigned, but most teams will be created and assigned to areas on the morning of the count. So the reason for mentioning this is just because the logistics of creating the teams in the morning can get a little bit tricky. So we just ask for your patience and patience with us during the map creation process. And in addition, we try as best we can to get guides and volunteers headed to locations that they are familiar with, but sometimes we're unable to accommodate everybody. So we ask that you come prepared to help out in any way possible and help us cover the entire county. So next I'm going to review the data collection forms. So the 2 important things that you're going to be going out in the field with are the maps and the tally sheets. So I have a few slides coming up that will show you what to expect. This is an example of what the tally sheet looks like. So in addition to your map, you will have this tally sheet. This is how you describe the individuals that you're seeing. In the coming slides, I'm going to go over and review some examples of what you might find. But for now, I just wanted you to see what this looks like. All these boxes on the top will be pre-filled out by us. That's for our coding purposes and to explain what this tally sheet goes with. But the boxes on the bottom, that's the area that you will fill out for individuals that you see. Here we have a sample of one of the maps that you might receive on the morning of the count. It's likely that you will receive more than one map area. It just depends on the size of the census tract. So this is a sample of census tract 18.01. You'll see a lot of information on the right side, but the actual map image, that's what you're going to be using to know which area to cover. The census tract is outlined in this bright red bold line. So your census tract and the area you're responsible to cover is everything inside of the line. We ask that you cover every single street within your census tract. So we want you to go up and down, make every turn possible. There's times when you're going to have to get out of your car. So if your census tract area includes a park maybe, or areas under bridges, we ask that you get out of your vehicle and go ahead and check those areas. This is when some of the expertise of your guide is going to come in. Your guide can help direct you, and you guys can make decisions together about when you need to get out and walk around, when it's okay to just drive the streets. We ask that you guys as a team decide which route to take. So if you have multiple maps, it's important that you figure out the best route that makes the most sense, which areas you want to hit first. In addition, it's important that you make sure that you're marking people and counting them on your tally on the correct tally sheet when you're in each map. So if you do have multiple maps, you'll have tally sheets that go with each map. So when you leave one census tract area and go to the other, make sure that you begin marking the correct people with the correct tally sheet. In addition, you'll notice a few different colors within this red bold area. There's a green color on the left side and then a purpley grayish color on the right side. And then in the bottom left corner of this map, there's also an area that's in white. These represent different jurisdictional areas. So when we're reporting our data, we also report where we find homeless individuals by jurisdiction. So when you're recording the data out in the field, it's important that you pay attention to these colors. I'll review this a little bit further on the next slide, but I just wanted you to go ahead and take a look at what you see right now, and you can see that those 3 different colors, and we'll have different tally sheets for each of those areas. So if you see somebody in that green area, you're going to put them on one tally sheet. And then if you see somebody in that purple area, they'll be on another tally sheet. I hope that makes sense. Again, this will be something that we review on the morning of the count, and it might be a little easier to understand when you see the materials in front of you. I know I spent some time on the previous slide reviewing this, but like I said, as you can see with the stars, it is very important. So just remember that you need to use a different tally sheet for each jurisdictional area, and this is for our reporting purposes so that the different cities and jurisdictional areas within Monterey or San Benito County have a better understanding of what is going on in their community. When you see a person in the purple area, one tally sheet. You see somebody in the white area, a separate tally sheet. Also remember that this isn't necessarily what your map is going to look like. You might have a census tract that is all one color, and in that case you wouldn't have to worry about the different tally sheets. So again, we will review this on the morning of the count, and it should all make sense then. All right, so next few slides will be some samples of how to fill in your tally sheets. So on the bottom in red, this would be, you see one individual who looks to be about in their 30s on the street. So you'll go through and mark line number 1, fill in for male if the individual is a male. If the individual is a female, you can bubble F. T stands for transgender. U stands for unknown. So you would mark unknown if the individual is sleeping in a sleeping bag or has a hat on or a hood and you can't tell whether they're male or female. It's okay to put unknown. Then you select the age category that you are assuming they're in, and then you go over to the dwelling or vehicle type and you write where you saw them. Since this individual is on the street, you fill in the bubble for street. The next sample we have would be if you see a family. So this family is 2 adults and 1 child. So I marked here that line 1 would be male in the 25 to 54 category on the street. Second would be a female in the 25 to 54 category on the street. And then the third line is for the child, so under 18 female on the street. This, you'll see a column that says family. Only fill in those bubbles if you can tell that it's a family, and then you'll fill in the bubble for each line, and then we ask that you draw a circle around them. I don't imagine that you will find many families while out on the street. However, it's important to review this so that if you do, you can appropriately mark that they are a family. Next would be a sample of a vehicle. So I reviewed earlier some signs to look for vehicles who are inhabiting homeless individuals. Now I'm going to review what to do if you see one. So likely, if you see a vehicle, you won't necessarily know how many people are in there. So it's okay to just put one line and circle in a bubble for car. If you are able to see, if you're able to see 2 people and you can guess their gender and age, you can go ahead and fill in a line for each person and put car and fill in the bubble for car on each line. But this is an example of you being unable to tell how many people are inhabiting the vehicle, but you can tell that somebody's living in there and that you are seeing a car. Then on the back of your tally sheet, we ask that for that car, so line number one, you would put the last 4 digits of the license plate. We don't want all the digits. This is of the license plate. This isn't a means of trying to track these cars down. This is solely for deduplication purposes. So when we go through and are processing the data, we'll make sure that the same car wasn't counted twice in case the car is moving around and going to multiple different census tract areas. The next sample would be if you see an encampment. So an encampment is defined as 2 or more tents or semi-permanent structures. So that, if you remember that picture I showed at the beginning of this slide, that is an example of an encampment. So these first lines 1 and 2, would be if you see 2 individuals standing outside, or you're able to see them by their tents. 2 males, one is in the 25 to 54 category, one is in the 55 plus. They're both in tents and they're together in the same area. So that would qualify as an encampment. So then you go to the column on the right that says encampment, fill in those bubbles and circle that they are in an encampment together. That's one example. If you look down to lines 5 through 7, that would be another sample of an encampment. That would be if you see 3 tents together, you can't see anybody inside. However, there's tents that you can tell are inhabited tents. You just aren't sure how many people are inside. That also qualifies an encampment. So you can do a line for each tent, go ahead and fill in the column for encampment with a circle, and then you're done. So we just finished up reviewing some samples of the tally sheets. Again, we'll go over that on the day of the count. Next, we just have a few more slides here and then we'll be all done. I'm going to take a second to review the guide and volunteer roles for the day of the count of your team. We expect that the homeless guide, uses their knowledge to identify individuals experiencing homelessness. The guides bring the team towards locations and map assignments that are likely to have individuals experiencing homelessness. When you're handed your map, originally at the deployment center, you guys can work together to kind of go over the map. And then when you're out and about driving and walking up through all the streets, we hope that your homeless guide would be able to direct you to certain locations that are likely to maybe have somebody sleeping in them. The guide also helps distinguish between safe and potentially dangerous situations. The volunteer role is to provide consultation and support in team decisions. The volunteer is generally in charge of the transportation, and the volunteer helps ensure full coverage of the map assignment. We ask that the teams reach a consensus together on who will be in charge of the tally sheet to ensure correct methodology. So you guys can work together while you're out in the field as far as who's going to be filling in the bubbles when they see somebody on the street or in the tent or in a vehicle. That can be the guide or the volunteer, whatever system works best for you. Next, I'm going to go through some safety logistics and just a couple more slides and then we'll be done. It's important that you are very safe and do not take any risks while out in the field. Like I mentioned before, this is a visual count only, so please do not approach individuals and ask them if they are homeless. Observe and tally only. Also, we want to make sure that you are not taking any photos while in the field. We want to respect these individuals' privacy, and we don't want them to think we're going to be doing anything with these photos. Also, we want to review and make sure you know that all information and locations that we collect on the day of the count will be kept confidential. This information is not discussed with outer groups after the count. Rather, it stays within our office and we process the data. It's important to stay with your teammate while you're out. Please don't separate. We ask that you stay together and keep track of each other and work together. We want to make sure that you're respectful of those individuals that you're counting. We want to remind you to call your deployment center captain if you have any problems or questions. Some more safety things to review. Don't enter abandoned buildings or other hard to access areas unless the team is familiar with those locations. So again, work together as the guide and volunteer to make a decision on what's the most safe route for you. Don't advertise your count location and keep information confidential post-count day. Again, this was where we want to remind you, if you see any encampments or you come across any tent areas, we don't want you to be sharing that information post-count. We want to respect those people's living accommodations. We'll review these safety protocols on the day of the count, and then, as always, while you're out in the field, call 911 if you have a true emergency. A couple things to review as far as preparation. You're going to want to try to wear comfortable shoes and clothes. You'll likely be out and about walking a lot. Dress warmly. You're out there early. As a volunteer, we ask that you bring a car if possible. Best to bring a charged cell phone that you can use while out in the field. You might want to bring a flashlight. You're going to be starting off pretty early in the morning, so some areas might be dark. A reminder that we'll be going out rain or shine. So bring an umbrella or raincoats if it's raining, and then get plenty of rest the night before. We'll be out there nice and early. You will be updated via email with any new information about the count, and then we have a 2017 Homeless Pit Count hotline if you have any questions, and that is through Applied Survey Research. The number is listed below, or you can also email Connie at appliedsurveyresearch.org if you have any questions from this training or any questions about where to go or what to do. But remember, we will review this training and the data collection protocols on the morning of the count when you arrive to your deployment center. Like I mentioned earlier, within the week or so before the count, we will email you with your deployment locations. If you are curious about that or need more information, feel free to reach out to this number or email when you're done with this. All right, that concludes our training for the 2017 point in time count. Thank you for your participation. We really appreciate your willingness and ability to volunteer on this important data collection process, and we look forward to seeing you. Thank you.